want your soul.
A few miles north of me, there's a little family-owned farm. The family takes a vacation in July, though, and they posted a job listing for a caretaker. My job would include feeding the animals, making sure the irrigation is working, and harvesting some crops. It's a small operation, so it's not fields and fields of stuff. Plus, they were offering $2,000. At the time, that seemed like an amazing deal. Now I'm not so sure. See, the Gershons left me detailed instructions in the envelope, along with half of the stipend. And as I sat down to read it, I realized that it sounded a little strange. Dear Emily, thank you for taking care of our farm. To ensure your safety and happiness, and the animals, we've included a list of instructions and rules. Number 1. Please feed the goats and chickens at 6 a.m. sharp. They get pretty cranky if it's not on time. Number 2. You will need to prune off the flora canes in the raspberry patch. To do this, cut the canes that are woody and have already fruited. Wear thick gloves because there are thorns. If you do get cut, immediately head inside and call Dr. Livesey to make sure your wound is not infected. Number 3. The sunflower field is easy to maintain and brings beauty to our farm. However, if you ever see a sunflower that isn't facing the same direction as the others, immediately head inside. Do not return to the sunflower field until the following day. Number 4. The farm is, as you know, surrounded by forest. Sometimes we get coyotes, foxes, or other wild animals prowling about the grounds at night. Don't worry, the animal pens are completely secure, and there is no need to check on the animals if you hear anything at night. In fact, we recommend you do not leave the farmhouse between sunset and sunrise. Number 5. Do not enter the corn maze. If you ever hear voices coming from the maze that sound like a child crying, do not enter. The corn maze is not open to visitors yet. It's most likely the bobcats in the woods. Number 6. Do not be alarmed if you see the goats awake in the middle of the night. They are semi-nocturnal and often wake up to roam, graze, or use the bathroom. Number 7. You may help yourself to any of the fruits or vegetables you harvest. However, do not eat the apples from the northwest corner of the orchard. Number 8. We no longer use scarecrows. If you see one, please return to the house. Lock all the doors and close all the curtains. Stay inside until the following morning. Number 9. Make sure to always stock the farm stand twice a day, in the morning and again in the afternoon. At night, we take all unsold produce inside and store it in the refrigerator. Number 10. We do not own any pigs. Thank you so very much, Emily. The Gershons. I glanced out the window. The sun was hanging low over the trees, orange rays filtering through the forest. Damn it. If I'm not supposed to be out after dark because of the wolves or whatever, I better get cracking. I walked over to the goats first. They huddled close to me as I filled their food bins, staring at me with their weird slit pupils. I tried to get it done as quickly as possible. Goats honestly freaked me out a little bit. As I hurried away, one with black and white fur pushed its little face through the fence. It bleated, staring at me. The chickens were more skeptical of me, staring at me and letting out long barks as they bobbed their heads. As soon as they realized I had food, though, they came over and pecked the ground. They were pretty cute, actually. I locked the gate and turned back towards the house, and I froze. Across the field from me stood the field of sunflowers. Bright golden petals and dark centers, swaying slightly in the wind. But while all of them tilted away from me, facing the dying sun, One of them, near the edge of the field, was instead facing me. I stared at its pitch-black center. Didn't the note say something about that? Go inside if one of the sunflowers is pointing a different way. I locked up the chicken gate. Then I strode across the grass towards the old farmhouse, still carrying the bag of chicken feed. I was halfway to the house when I turned around again, and I wish I hadn't. The sunflower was still facing me, even though based on my path, it shouldn't have been. I picked up my pace towards the house. Oh, come on. What do you think's gonna happen? That sunflower's gonna chase after you and murder you? My brain knew it was stupid, but there was something instinctual, a gut feeling that forced my legs to pump harder. I didn't even bother dropping the feed off at the shed. I raced into the house and locked all the doors. Safe. I took a final glance out at the sunflower, and then I went into the tiny kitchen and started some water boiling for pasta. By the time I was sitting down to eat, I was shaking my head. So stupid, afraid of a sunflower. Something awoke me in the middle of the night. I sat up, my neck aching from the crappy pillow they'd left me. I looked around my tiny bedroom, but nothing seemed amiss. Well, of course there were things amiss, like the peeling paint, and the light bulb that flickered, and the clogged toilet, but nothing different. I yawned and checked my phone. 3:12 a.m. Sighing, I settled back into sleep. But before I drifted off, I heard it, a small high-pitched noise, coming from outside. I slowly forced myself out of bed and walked over to the window. Underneath me, the farm sprawled out into the darkness, but it was distorted in the old glass, shapes and colors bleeding into each other like running paint. I flipped the window lock and pushed it open, the wood squeaking loudly in my ears, and I listened. Silence. Then a voice. Help me. It was a child's voice, coming from the direction of the cornfield. That's no fucking bobcat. My blood ran cold. I stared out into the darkness at the cornfield on the edge of the woods, hoping that it was just some lingering dream or something. But as I stood there, the cool summer breeze wafting into the room, I heard it again. Please, help me. The voice wavered as if the child was crying. I squinted into the darkness, staring at the cornfield. I need to get out there. I remembered the Gershon's rule, but there was no way this was an animal. Hey, I'm coming, don't worry, I shouted out the window. Silence, and then a rustling sound. I squinted at the cornfield and I could see the stalks moving as something moved within them. Stay where you are, I shouted into the darkness. I'm coming out to get you. The corn stalks continued to move, and every muscle in my body froze. The amount of corn moving, there was no way it was just a small child in there. The corn was swaying, dancing, roiling in an area maybe 10 feet across, and it was making its way towards the edge of the field, rapidly. I then shut the window, and then I closed the blinds, my heart hammering in my chest. I raced downstairs and checked the locks, and then finally, when I was sure I was safe, I called the police. But they wouldn't even come out. There are no missing children in the area, and what you saw was most likely a bear, they explained calmly. I think they must know all about the Gershon's farm. So now I lie here, in my bed, listening to the snaps and rustles of the corn stalks. There is a chair wedged under my doorknob. I've triple-checked all the locks, and all I can do is wait for morning. 6 a.m. came all too early. The alarm blared in my ears, and I forced myself out of bed, groaning. The sun had just crested over the hill, and the sky was lit with the pale of gray dawn. I could hear the rooster crowing already. I looked out the window, scanned the farm, but everything looked normal. All the sunflowers were facing halfway towards me, in the direction of the rising sun. The cornfield was still, and the chickens were milling about the coop, pecking the ground. The chickens were probably the only part of the farm I liked. The fat little hens ran towards me as I poured the food onto the ground. Making happy noises, they pecked it up. I locked the gate and started over the hill towards the shed to get the goat feed. And that's when I heard it. An oink. I stopped in my tracks. The Gershon's note said they didn't own any pigs. The note didn't say anything about avoiding the pigs, though. So I was free to go fetch the goat feed, right? I started walking again, up the hill. And that's when I realized there was something off about the sound. It almost sounded human, like a person saying oink instead of an actual animal sound. For a second, I had a weird mental image of a naked man covered in his own filth, crouching on the ground, saying oink over and over. I shook my head and continued up the hill, and when I got to the top, I saw the source of the noise. A fat pink pig standing in the grass. I let out a breath of relief. See? It's just an ordinary pig. I passed the pig, ignoring it completely, and opened the shed. I put the chicken feed back, pulled out the goat feed, and started back up the hill. I stopped dead, though, as my eyes fell on the pig. Its face. It almost looked human. Its fleshy pink snout was shorter than it should be. Its curled little ears sat low and flat on its head, and its eyes. They weren't round and beady, but almond-shaped, like a person's, with dark pupils that stared up at me in a way that suggested intelligence. The feed bag then fell out of my hands, and I stumbled backward. But the pig didn't advance. It just stared at me with its human eyes. I backed away, keeping my eyes on it. I slowly walked around it so that I was going back towards the house. Whenever I got over the hill, and that horrible little face was finally right out of my sight, I whipped around and broke into a run. What the fuck was that? I panted to myself as I locked the front door behind me. Not knowing what else to do, I pulled out my phone and called the police. But when they picked up, I wasn't sure what to say. I found a pig that doesn't look like a pig on the farm, the Gershon's farm. Did you touch the pig? The officer cut in. What? Did you have any contact with the pig? Any at all? No. Good. We'll send an officer out to deal with it. 15 minutes later, I saw a police car pull up the driveway. They asked me where I'd seen it, then told me to stay inside. I went over to the window and watched them walk up the hill, and then disappeared. A minute passed, then a shrill squeal erupted in the silence. 5 minutes later, the officers reappeared, carrying a large plastic bag that swung with each step. Hey, hey, I called out as they headed to the cruiser. What was that thing? The officers then glanced at each other and looked back at me. Rabies, the female officer said, while the male stuffed the bag into the back seat. A bunch of rabid pigs have been showing up in this area. Gonna send it off to get tested. Good thing you didn't touch it. Before I could ask her more questions, she hopped into the driver's side, and then they were gone. I stared out the window, utterly perplexed. Why didn't the Gershons tell me to stay away from the pigs? After the debacle with the pig, I decided to take it easy. I made a wholesome breakfast, read a few chapters of the thriller I was working through, and called my boyfriend. Around 11 a.m., though, I realized I'd forgotten to stock the farm stand. It was still technically morning, so I ran out into the field, filled my hod with zucchini and tomatoes, and ran down the driveway as fast as I could without spilling any of the produce. But as the little farm stand came into view, I saw that there was already someone waiting. I checked my watch. It was 11:49 a.m. I'm so sorry, I breathed as I spread the produce out on the wooden table. I was supposed to get this out earlier, but there was a pig, and it just... Something then made me stop rambling. I glanced up to see the person standing there was a little odd. He was an old man, probably 6 feet tall and very thin. He wore, surprisingly, a crisp black suit and an old-timey bowler hat in the sweltering heat. He was smiling at me, but his teeth were deeply yellow and crooked, and his eyes were sunken back in his skull. There was nothing unnatural about him, just a slightly creepy-looking old guy. But in a way, he reminded me of the creepy dudes from that one Buffy the Vampire episode where they take away everyone's voices. "So, what are you looking for today?" I asked, when he didn't move to take any of the produce. "Are the Gershons here?" I shook my head. "No, they won't be back for 2 weeks." He said thoughtfully. "They didn't tell me they were leaving." "Oh, you know them?" And he let out a small chuckle. "You might say that." I waited for him to either take produce or leave, but he didn't do that either. He just stood there, looking at me. The way his blue eyes cut into mine made a chill run down my spine. It wasn't a predatory or sexual stare. It felt more like he was examining me, studying me, trying to read every tilt of my head and blink of my eyes. It made me feel extremely uncomfortable. "So, are you interested in any of this? The tomatoes look really good today," I said, trying to not sound nervous. "Or if you're looking for something else, I could go pick it for you. Only the Gershons can provide what I'm looking for, sweetheart." "Oh, okay. Well, I'll head back up to the farm. If you change your mind, the prices are listed on the whiteboard, and you just leave the money in the box." I shot him a fake smile, turned around, and headed up the hill as quickly as I could without seeming weird. But then he said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Emily?" I never told him my name. The smartest thing would have been to run, but instead I turned around. He wasn't chasing me. He was still standing at the farm stand, 10 yards from me. "I wouldn't trust the Gershons if I were you," he called out. And then he turned on his heel and strode away. As I watched him go, I realized there wasn't any car parked at the bottom of the driveway. He just turned onto the old country road and walked away. I watched him until he rounded the bend and disappeared from sight. I retreated into the house, checked all the locks, and decided I would spend the rest of the day inside. At least until it was time to feed the animals and stock the farm stand again. When I fed the goats that evening, they still seemed mad at me from the morning. With all the pig business, I hadn't gotten their morning meal to them until nearly 10 a.m., and as I entered the pen, they eyed me warily. A brown one bleated, with a look of betrayal in his slit pupil eyes. My last task of the day was picking up the unsold produce. I hurried down the driveway, garden hod in my arms, and an audiobook playing through my earbuds. The sun hung low in the sky, casting shadows that stretched across the driveway before me. The sun wasn't setting yet, but that wouldn't be for another hour, and it still made me nervous. Most of the produce was gone, but I grabbed the 3 remaining zucchini and put them in the hod. Then I turned around and hurried back up the hill as fast as I could. But when I crested the hill, I saw something in the fields that made my heart stop. A scarecrow. Its arms stretched out at its sides. Its head hung limply on its shoulders. I couldn't see it in detail. It was too far away. But I could see its silhouette clearly. I immediately broke into a sprint. "Just get inside. I'll be fine." I focused on the white door. It was still so far away, but I forced myself to stare at it, to keep my eyes away from the scarecrow. And I made it. I slammed the door shut and drew the deadbolt. I closed all the curtains and checked all the other locks. And then I collapsed onto the couch and called my boyfriend, Derek. "You need to come here," I told him. "There's someone out there," and I ran inside. I rambled on in incoherent sentences until he interrupted me. Wait, slow down. You think there's somebody out there?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" Derek was a good man, but he often thought I was being a little too paranoid and a little too scared. When I insisted I was being followed home from work, he told me it was probably nothing, and just some guy walking the same route as me. When I heard sounds in the middle of the night, he insisted it was the house settling. When I watched true crime shows and told him how we need to go do X or Y so we don't fall victim to a crime like that, he'd just laugh. It wasn't intentionally mean, but in these moments it was painfully obvious he'd grown up as a man, with little to be afraid of in this world. And it wasn't the same for me. Yes, I'm sure. They said the farm doesn't use scarecrows, and there is a fucking scarecrow standing on the hill, looking at me. I heard a loud sigh on the other end. Are you saying you don't believe me, Derek? I didn't say anything, okay? Relax, he said calmly. Well, you sighed. Okay, sorry. It's just, never mind. Please, just come over here. I'll explain everything. Well, why don't you come over here? Because if I go outside, the scarecrow will get me, Derek. What the fuck? What are you not getting? Then I realized that the last sentence did sound pretty unhinged on its own. Listen, there's some really weird stuff going on this farm, okay? And then I launched into an explanation of everything. The rules, the sunflowers, the cornfield, even the pig man. Well, honey, why didn't you tell me this earlier? He'd asked when I finished. Because you wouldn't believe me, okay? You still don't. Well, I'm trying to. Just this sounds like a lot of ghost story type stuff, But look, I can tell you're upset, and I'll come over. I'm leaving right now, okay? I'll be there in a half hour. I ended the call and stared at the curtains. For a minute, I was tempted to part them, to make sure the scarecrow hadn't gotten closer. But I didn't want to break the rules. When Derek arrived, I took every precaution to get him inside safely. I told him to park as close to the house as possible, look around for scarecrows, and then run as fast as he could. As soon as he was inside safely, my fear melted away. We put on a movie, had some good laughs, and then went to bed. But around 2 a.m., something woke me with a start. And when I sat up, I realized Derek was gone. Derek? I called out, walking into the hallway. Where are you, Derek? When he didn't reply, I walked downstairs. I found him standing in front of the window, peering outside. Hey, you're not supposed to look outside. Shh, there's somebody out there. I joined him at the window and scanned the fields. I don't see anybody. No, there was definitely somebody out there, Emily, I'm telling you. His fingers inched towards his belt, and my heart plummeted when I saw the shiny black metal sticking out of his pocket. You brought a gun? You said you were scared, he whispered back. You said somebody was out there. I didn't really believe you, but now I do. Aren't you glad I brought it? No, I never want to be near that thing. Okay, well, we can have some stupid debate about gun rights later, but right now, there's somebody outside. And if we just go back to sleep, we might not wake up in the morning. Derek, I'm just telling it like it is, Emily. I crossed my arms and stared out into the fields with him. And then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. A shadowy figure walking along the edge of the sunflower field. And Derek didn't waste any time. He unbolted the door and swung it open. Hey, you! Get the fuck off this property. I've got a gun. The figure stopped and paused, and then sidestepped into the sunflowers. Before I could stop him, Derek ran out of the house. Derek! I shouted, but he didn't stop. I paused at the threshold, and then I sprinted out after him. Come back, please. Fuck. He was running straight for the sunflower field. Don't go in there, I yelled. He probably wouldn't have even stopped, but when he got to the border, I screamed bloody murder at him, and he stopped for just a moment. Derek, you cannot go in there, I panted, grabbing his arm. The sunflowers. Yeah, right, you told me. They're evil or watch you or something. I think I got it, Emily, okay? He gestured to his gun. And if I don't scare this motherfucker, he's gonna come back and rape or murder or do whatever he came here to do, and that ain't going down tonight. And with that, he disappeared into the foliage. I stood there, panting at the border of the field. He'll be okay. He will be okay. But I was lying to myself. As the adrenaline faded, I lifted my head and scanned the flowers. They were all turned towards me, yellow petals appearing silver in the light of the full moon. Okay, all right, it's okay. They're all pointing the same direction. You see? But wait, there was a single flower in the center of the field, turned away from me. "Derek, come out of there." But there was silence. No pounding footsteps, no rustling, no nothing. And a chill ran over my body. "Please come out," I begged, staring into the shadowy darkness under the flowers. And then I heard it. "Help." Derek's voice, strangled in pain. I reacted instinctively. My feet hit the dirt and I stumbled into the darkness. Leaves brushed my body, scratched at my arms. "Derek, where are you?" I called. The sunflowers stretched up, 6 or 7 feet tall, their moonlit heads swaying in the breeze above me. I turned a full circle, looking in every direction for him, but all I saw were more stems, more leaves, more inky black shadows. I stopped walking and listened, straining my ears for any sort of sound, and then, after several seconds, I heard something. A soft rustling. There was just one problem. It was coming from right above my head. I looked up. The sunflower directly above me was tilted straight down. And this close, I saw it clearly. Its head wasn't full of seeds, no. Where the seed should have been, there was just an abyss of pure black. And there were things between the petals in the abyss. White, sharp things, all pointed towards the center. Teeth. I broke into a sprint. With both arms, I pushed the sunflowers out of the way, forcing myself through the field. "Derek!" I screamed, but all I heard was more rustling above my head. At that point, all the sunflowers tilted towards me, and their mouths opened, and rows of sharp fangs were revealed, gleaming in the moonlight and descending towards me. Then, something grabbed my arm. I was dragged through the fields, the foliage snapping and rustling underneath me. "Help!" I screamed, but as my legs kicked against the dirt, I realized I was powerless, as I was dragged to my certain death. I was staring up at the stars. The thing that was clasped around my arm wasn't a sunflower. It was a hand, an old wrinkled hand. And I looked up to see a bowler hat in a dark suit. It was the old man from the farm stand. And there, several feet away from me in the dirt, was Derek. He was breathing hard, alive, but his right arm was covered in dark blood that spilled out into the soil. "I think it's time we had a talk," he said calmly as he let go of my arm. "What were you thinking, going into the sunflowers?" the old man asked as he wound gauze around Derek's arm. "What were you thinking? I saw you go into the field too," Derek replied. "I went behind the field to hide from the crazy man with a gun." "You were lurking around out there at 2 a.m., dude. What was I supposed to think?" Derek shot back, grimacing in pain. "And you," the old man said, pointing squarely at me. "You should have known that if he couldn't kill whatever was attacking him with a gun, going in after him was an idiot move." "I just wanted to save him," I said, arms crossed. "Oh, so you were armed too?" No, I wasn't." He shook his head. I caught the phrase "stupid kids" muttered under his breath. Then he took off his hat, set it in the middle of the table, and glanced at each of us. "I'm going to tell you both what's going on here, and then I hope you can help me." Derek and I exchanged a glance. "Well, how do we know we can trust you?" he asked. "He just saved our lives, Derek," I replied. "He was hanging around outside in the middle of the night for no goddamn good reason." "It was a good reason," the old man snapped back, glaring at Derek. "And if you just listened to me for a damn minute, you'd understand." "Come on," I whispered, squeezing Derek's hand. The old man straightened himself and then began to speak. "The Gershons started this farm almost 20 years ago. They bought the plot of land from an old widow who had lived here her entire life. She didn't want to sell it, but she needed the money. Well, they drew up the contract, but at the last moment, they changed the paperwork and tricked her into selling it for half the price. When she realized she'd been tricked, she cursed the land itself, but they just laughed. They didn't believe in curses or superstitions or witchcraft or the supernatural. The old man stopped and looked pointedly at Derek. He broke eye contact and then looked at the floor. Of course, as soon as they planted the sunflower field, they realized the curse was very real. Eventually, they tried to sell the property, but by that time, news of the curse had spread, and they would only get a fraction of what they paid for it. They weren't willing to lose their money, so they kept it. And with time, they learned that if they followed certain rules and stayed careful, they could grow some crops and turn a profit. But no one is perfect, and after some close calls, the Gershons decided they didn't want to risk their lives anymore, but they were perfectly fine with risking other people's lives. So they started hiring people to tend to the farm. They preyed on the weak, the disadvantaged, the desperate, single mothers, undocumented immigrants, people who were relatively new to the town, who hadn't yet heard of the curse, or were too desperate to care. The deal was a good one too, a share of the crops, a place to live, and decent pay. This is where I come in though. My daughter was one of these people. She was a single mother, and I was terrible. He paused and swallowed, as if swallowing emotion, but his face remained unchanged. I wouldn't let her and her son stay with me when she was evicted from her apartment. I thought it would cause too much conflict with my wife, and I was trying hard to make it work. But now I see that none of that mattered. A few weeks later, she was hired by the Gershons, and neither she nor my grandson were ever seen again. Derek and I sat there in stunned silence. I'm terribly sorry, sir," I finally choked out. "It's a horrible story." "Then help me get them back," he said, a pleading look in his eye. "Get them back? Well, how are we going to do that?" "They're not dead. You see, I recognize the voice in the cornfield. It's the voice of my grandson." Silence then fell over the three of us, and Derek and I looked at each other. The old man must have noticed our confusion because he continued. "The victims aren't always killed. Sometimes they're transformed, like my daughter and grandson in the cornfield, or the scarecrow, or the pigs." I clasped my hands over my mouth. "The pigs?" And he nodded. "No, I called the police when I saw one, and they came and they think it was rabies." Tears burned my eyes. "I think they killed it." "Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but it's not your fault. The Gershons have a lot of power in this town, and they have a deal with the police. Dirty cops have been known to get rid of evidence in the sunflower field. I've devoted the past 3 years of my life to this. I've run into every obstacle. I know everything there is to know. A lot of it I learned from the widow's children directly. So there is a way to get them back. The people who were transformed?" I asked. "Yes, I was never able to get into the house before. The Gershons made sure of that. But now..." He then reached into his pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a small mesh bag. And within it, among what looked like dried plant material, I could make out something long and white, a bone. This is what the widow used to create the curse. Her daughter told me it was hidden behind the medicine cabinet in the bathroom, and there it was. Using this, I should be able to reverse the curse's effects. He glanced at Derek and then back at me. "So will you help me?" I paused, looking into the old man's blue eyes, and then I nodded. We began at dawn. The sun crested over the hill, sending long shadows over the path. The old man led us to the edge of the cornfield, which now in the daylight didn't look so ominous. The stalks swayed gently in the breeze, illuminated in gold from the rising sun. "Are you ready?" he asked. Derek and I stood several feet away as he lifted the bag. He recited several sentences of Latin or some other language, something he'd memorized in his research, I assumed. He nearly shouted the last sentence, and then he dumped the contents of the bag on the ground. The dried leaves scattered in the wind. The bone twirled in the air and then bounced into the dirt. For a minute, nothing happened. But then I heard it, a soft rustling from within the corn, Slowly, it grew louder and louder, and I grabbed Eric's hand and squeezed it, bracing myself for some sort of eldritch horror to come out. But it worked. A woman walked out of the corn, tall and thin, holding hands with a smiling little boy. I watched, my eyes welling up with tears as the woman hugged her father. Then, as both of them hugged the little boy, "Come on," the old man said, wiping his eyes. "It's time for you to come home." The old man then started off down the driveway, towards the main road, with his daughter and his grandson in his wake. Dread started to twist in my gut. Something felt off. He was just going to walk away, without looking for the others? Without even a glance in our direction? I scanned the farm, but I didn't see anyone emerging. I didn't hear any voices either. "Hey, what about the others?" I called out. The old man stopped and turned around, and now he wasn't smiling at all. "I'm sorry," he said. My heart sunk further. "What are you talking about? What do you mean you're sorry?" "The curse can't be reversed," he said, his blue eyes glinting in the rising sun. "The only way to free someone from the farm is to give someone in their place." "I'm sorry," the old man said, and he put his arm around his daughter, and she looked back at us with sadness in her eyes, holding her little boy's hand. And then he continued down the driveway. "Don't just walk away," I screamed. "Emily," Derek started. And this time Derek's voice had an odd quality to it. It was muffled, raspy. I whipped around and froze. Straw was poking out of Derek's mouth. "Oh my God," I screamed, stumbling over to him, but it was too late. His skin was sickly gray, his eyes were glassy and blank, and his lips, they almost looked like they'd been drawn on with marker. I watched in horror as the man I loved turned into a scarecrow. His body was still above me, arms stretched stiffly out at his sides, flannel shirt stuffed with straw, burlap head hanging limply on his shoulders, and then he moved. His head swung wildly towards me, his eyes now nothing more than buttons, fixed squarely on me. I started to run, and I ran as fast as I could towards the house, but I could feel something changing inside me. Everything felt off balance. My legs felt all wrong, bending and twisting underneath. I stumbled inside and collapsed to the floor, crying. But I knew I was changing too. For some reason, my changes were happening more slowly than Derek's, but when I look in the mirror, I can see the changes. My nose is longer, my ears are twisted, and my skin is pinker. I've tried to write this up in my journal as quickly as I could. Please stay away from the Gershon farm. Don't buy their bullshit. Don't go to work there. Don't do anything. Run as fast as you can and never look back. The space between my fingers is melting away. My hands are growing stiff. And in just an hour or so, they will be hooves. And I will have no way of communicating with the outside world. So please, whatever you do, don't come to Gershon Farm.